Değerli katılımcılarımız, DEİK Asya Pasifik Bölge Direktörlüğü olarak düzenlediğimiz Asya Pasifik bölgesinde iklim değişikliği, sektörel riskler ve değişimler webinarımıza hoş geldiniz. Öncelikle kısa bir hatırlatma gerçekleştirmek istiyorum. Webinar etkinliğimizde sunumlar ve konuşmaların önemli bir kısmı İngilizce olarak gerçekleşecektir. Bu bakımdan konuşmaları Türkçe duymak isteyen katılımcılarımız alt panelde yer alan Interpretation kısmından Japonca seçeneğini seçmeleri gerekiyor. If you wish to hear English when a speaker delivers its remarks in Turkish, you may click English on the interpretation below. Bugün alanında uzman çok değerli konuklarımızı ağırlayacağız. Sayın Mustafa Osman Turan, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Dakka Büyükelçisi. Sayın Roberto Ridolfi, Birleşmiş Milletler Gıda ve Tarım Örgütü Genel Müdür Yardımcısı. Sayın Fatih Özkadı, Arçelik Kalite, Sürdürülebilirlik ve Resmi İlişkiler Direktörü. Sayın Altay Atlı, Boğaziçi Üniversitesi Asya Çalışmaları Merkezi Öğretim Üyesi ve Atlı Global Kurucu Direktörü ve Sayın Sıla Bozok, Dünya Enerji Konseyi Gelecek Enerji Liderleri Üyesi. İklim krizinin aciliyetini her sektörde ve her alanda hissettiğimiz son yıllarda DEİK Asya Pasifik Bölge Direktörlüğü olarak son derece değerli uzmanları bu webinar vesilesiyle bir araya getirmekten memnuniyet duyuyoruz. I'm now leaving the virtual floor to the moderator of the webinar, Mr. Altay Atlı. Thank you very much.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Thank you very much, Temmuz, and welcome to the entire audience, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I would like to thank DEİK, the Foreign Economic Relations Board of Turkey, for this very important and timely event. I say timely because actually climate change is not new, but with the pandemic that we are experiencing, the COVID-19 pandemic, actually we are now understanding how serious the problem, not only the health problem, COVID-related problem, but also climate change is. Climate change definitely remains as one of the greatest threats to the world and the Asia-Pacific in particular, which is more vulnerable to risks than perhaps any other region. But COVID has shown us that, I mean, these things are global problems, and we really need to be able, as the world, to bring about, to produce, to generate global solutions to global problems. That's something that we have been not successful so far as the world, as the humanity. And COVID has shown us we don't have time to lose. And we definitely don't have time to lose with respect to climate change. All right, so now, well, in order to bring up solutions, to create solutions, we need to talk. Dialogue is important, and I think the biggest value of today's event is that it has managed to bring people, experts from different walks of life, from different sectors. We have ambassadors, we have the corporate sector, we have the energy sector, we have the academy, and so on. I think this is very important. So without losing much time, I want to start with our discussions, and our first speaker will be Ambassador Mustafa Osman Turan. He is representing Turkey in Bangladesh, but in addition to that, he is also the co-chair of the project board of the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals Impact Accelerator, which is a global accelerator built by a multi-stakeholder platform focusing on empowering systems entrepreneurs and innovators who are providing impact at scale. So it's all about generating market-creating innovations, and especially for refugee populations and least developed countries, which are suffering the most from the climate change as well. Now, Ambassador Turan is so defining himself, and I take this from his social media actually, as a diplomat by profession and social entrepreneur by passion. I think this is very important because if you want to solve global problems, we need professionals for sure, who are doing their job. We need also entrepreneurs who are going the extra mile, and we need passion because otherwise, you know, the task will be very important. Okay, Ambassador Turan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind introduction. As you said, this is a very timely meeting. The world is going through an unprecedented crisis because of a virus and this crisis has come to our everyday reality while we were already struggling with many other global challenges. And when we talk about global challenges, I think the climate change is at the top of the agenda.
Gitti değil mi Bridorfi? Attendilerde varsa.
So yes, the climate change is at the top of our agenda. And today, of course, I'm not an expert on climate change, but I live and work right now, represent Turkey in a country, Bangladesh, which is more vulnerable to climate change than almost any other place on earth. So I will speak to you as someone who has worked on sustainable development goals back in Ankara for 5 years, and also as an ambassador here in Bangladesh, a country which is not only vulnerable, but also very resilient to climate change. Environmental issues, just a couple of words to introduce the topic perhaps. Environmental issues such as pollution, extreme weather events, land degradation, desertification, and water scarcity are issues that each country is affected by in today's world. Climate change is accelerating, as we all know, and its adverse impacts are also getting worse and making worse these environmental challenges. And the weather conditions tend to be warmer, as we witness every year, and drier as well. According to World Meteorological Organization, July 2019 was the hottest month ever recorded on Earth. Obviously, some regions are hit harder and face larger risks in terms of the effects of climate change, and Bangladesh, as I said, is one of those. During the past 2 decades, average temperatures in the Mediterranean region, for example, have already risen more than the global average. Sea levels have risen by 6 centimeters, and the water acidification has been increasing as well. So we have a huge challenge in front of us, and increasing and better coordinating our national and international efforts can assist in improving our environment in the future. So a few words about Bangladesh. As I said, it's very vulnerable to climate change, and I think it's a very interesting country when we have to look into the effects of climate change, because many countries are talking about this challenge in theoretical terms, whereas in Bangladesh, people are living this reality in their own life right now. So in the most recent World Risk Index, which evaluates how susceptible 172 countries are to natural disasters like earthquakes, cyclones, and floods, Bangladesh came in at number 9. But as I said, Bangladesh is also one of the most resilient countries and has a plan to fight back against the increasingly unpredictable forces of Mother Nature. They say that necessity is the mother of innovation. So no country better demonstrates that principle in action than Bangladesh. According to Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, what Bangladesh has achieved in the practice of adaptation is nothing short of miraculous. So I will try to give you an idea about how and why one of the poorest and most densely populated countries has become the global leader in climate change adaptation. First of all, let's talk about the unique geography of Bangladesh, which makes it really vulnerable to climate change. The country sits at the bottom of a delta plain where 3 main rivers converge. It's straddled by the melting Himalayan glaciers in the north and the Bay of Bengal in the south. This combined with the fact that 2/3 of the country is less than 5 meters above sea level, makes it acutely susceptible to flooding. Just this month, for example, more than 200,000 people were displaced after heavy rain caused the Jamuna River, one of those big rivers, to swell and break through an embankment, triggering some of the worst floods the country has seen in years. Bangladesh also suffers from countrywide droughts approximately every 5 years, but also more isolated local droughts on a much more regular basis. All of these natural disasters have a devastating impact on agriculture, which is Bangladesh's largest economic sector. Finally, Bangladesh is subject to the rarest and most severe tropical storm categories in the world. It is estimated that the country lost almost 6% of its GDP to storms between the years 1998 up until 2010. So while it's struggling many other challenges right now, like COVID-19 or already existing migration challenge, urbanization challenge, all of these coming together present enormous difficulties for a country like Bangladesh. While Bangladesh its geography naturally makes it vulnerable to these conditions, climate change obviously makes the problem worse. And researchers believe that in just a few decades, rising sea levels could claim 10% of the country's land. And the World Bank predicts that by 2050, there could be as many as 14 million climate migrants in Bangladesh. This is a huge number. So the good news is all of these challenges made Bangladesh very resilient to climate change. While in some countries, climate change remains an abstract and even contested concept, Bangladeshis have seen firsthand the devastating impact it can have. It's this reality that has been the driving force behind the country's attempts to adapt. Bangladesh is learning to adapt to the effects of climate change faster than any other country in the world, because the impacts are here and the people are having to deal with them out of necessity. In 2009, Bangladesh was the first country in the world to create a national program to determine how it would adapt to a changing climate. The measures ranged from the development of climate resilient crops to the construction of cyclone shelters. Importantly, the government put its money where its mouth is and has established a dedicated fund to support the plans. Over the last decade, Bangladesh has spent on average $1 billion annually for climate change projects. And it's not just the government that is putting in place policies to help the country adapt to climate change. Bangladeshis are also doing their part as well. In the Ours, a wetland ecosystem in northeastern Bangladesh, farmers used to grow rice and raise chickens, but increased flooding rendered that impossible. Instead, with the help of a local non-governmental organization, some locals have switched to farming ducks, for example, which are not only better suited to the new climate, but are also more profitable. So have these efforts paid off? The figures speak for themselves. The results can be measured not just in terms of the poverty and livelihoods protected, but in the number of lives that have been saved. In 2070, when the Bohola cyclone tore through the region, 500,000 lives were lost. This year, when Cyclone Amphan struck the same area, only 20 people were killed in Bangladesh. Thanks to more accurate weather forecasting and community-based warning systems and stronger shelters, 2.5 million people were moved to safety before they were touched by the cyclone. So while Bangladesh and West Bengal have made major improvements in their respective cyclone warning and evacuation systems that prevented the loss of human lives, there was still considerable damage, obviously, to people's homes and livelihoods. And this becomes even more acute while we are tackling COVID-19 and its economic downturn at the same time. So what should be the next phase of our recovery plans in Bangladesh at the national, regional, and global levels? One of the prominent professors who is specialized on climate change adaptation, Professor Selimul Haq, proposed some way forward for Bangladesh. At the national level, he proposes to develop a short-term recovery plan with financial resources from the country's own budget, but also from the global community to tackle humanitarian and development concerns of the general public. This would obviously require a holistic thinking and planning, which is crucial for success. And the good news is that these discussions are taking place every day here in Bangladesh, and hopefully will result in the whole of society approach to the recovery. At the regional level, we should recognize that in Bangladesh there is this mangrove forest called Sunderbans, and this forest actually protects human lives. When the cyclone hits the ground, the forest reduces the effects of the cyclone on the human settlements. So it's very important at the regional level, therefore, that these forests are protected, not just in Bangladesh, but also in the West Bengal. So all of these are interrelated issues, you know, biodiversity, climate change, and protection of the forests. So we should join our forces with countries like Bangladesh to protect the flora and fauna that also protects the human lives. Finally, at the global level, as you all know, the 26th Annual Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change will be held in November 2021 in Glasgow in Scotland. As Bangladesh will be chairing the Climate Vulnerable Group in this conference, government of Bangladesh will have an opportunity to share its best practices for all the most vulnerable developing countries. And one thing that the cyclones have made absolutely clear is that loss and damage from human-induced climate change is now a reality and can no longer be avoided. So we have to push for a mechanism to provide funding for this loss and damage that goes beyond insurance in any given country. So Bangladesh and the vulnerable countries in the region now have to think beyond single emergencies such as cyclone, flood, or pandemic. They have to see them as linked and have their preparedness systems and recovery mechanisms linked up as well. So better preparedness would prove to be the most effective in minimizing the damage from such emergencies. So while Bangladesh has had to learn the hard way on how to adapt to a more unpredictable and extreme climate, I believe that the lessons learned by Bangladesh will be invaluable for others. This includes Turkey as well. There are many countries that are just as vulnerable to climate change, but that don't have the knowledge or ability to build resilience on their own. Bangladesh is our best teacher in that respect. Turkey is aware that climate change is an existential threat, especially for the most vulnerable and the least developed countries, such as Bangladesh. We have always underlined the importance of increased adaptation, allocation of adequate financial and technical support for the least developed countries, sharing technology, best practices, know-how with countries in need are extremely important for strengthening their resilience. In line with the spirit of Sustainable Development Goals, the measures taken to protect our planet and combat all climate-related challenges should be carried out by ensuring that no one is left behind. Turkey remains committed to take and implement the necessary measures to protect our planet and support the most vulnerable countries in their efforts to combat climate change. So I really thank you for the opportunity to speak about the best practices here in Bangladesh and to tell you its story of a country which can turn from a very vulnerable country to one of the most resilient nations on planet against the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Turan. And definitely Bangladesh experience with climate change is very important, not only for Turkey, but the entire world, because, you know, for most of the world, while climate change is still a theoretical abstraction, there are even people who don't believe in climate change. For, as you said, for Bangladesh, it's a part of the daily life. It's a physical reality. So why not learn from them? Why not, you know, take their lessons seriously? Thank you very much, Ambassador. And our next speaker will be Dr. Roberto Ridolfi, who is the Assistant Director General at the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations that leads international efforts to defeat hunger. So their goal is to achieve food security for all the world population. And I think, well, if you ask my personal opinion, is that FAO is one of the most important agencies under the UN, because as long as there are people on the earth who are, as long as there are still hungry mouths to feed in the world, all the rest, all the other things that we are discussing are irrelevant. Personal opinion. And Dr. Ridolfi, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Ridolfi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sorry for being slightly late in connecting myself. I had some internet connection, but I heard most of the very interesting speech by His Excellency Ambassador Turan. I've been ambassador in the Pacific Island countries for the European Union. That was in 2005 to 2007. And I experienced, therefore, in 2005, we built a strategy of assistance to the Pacific Island countries, all based on climate change. That was 2005, much earlier than Paris in 2015, as you recall. But because we were forced by climate change into livelihoods. As the ambassador said, in these countries, there is a country, Kiribati. Kiribati is a country formed by hundreds and thousands of small islands. And you know, the difference of the size of the land of this country between the low tide of the ocean and the high tide of the ocean is half. So imagine how important is climate change and the rise of the ocean's level in the livelihood, in the survival of these countries. And of course, they have a number of other challenges related to climate change that are as important for, again, survival. So we are talking of survival. That's why in 2005, we were thinking to climate change, talking and acting on climate change well before the Paris Agreement, COP21, as it were. I have a presentation that is based, I don't know if you share or I share from my computer, give me a sign. I can share it from my computer if I have the ability to do so.
I think you can share it. Let's try so, otherwise our technical staff will help.
Climate change, an important driver of food systems. So I give you now, that before was a perspective of a former ambassador of the European Union in Africa, in Uganda, as well as in the Pacific Islands. Now I give you the perspective from FIO. FIO, indeed, climate change is an important driver of food systems. Driver meaning something that influences radically the food system. You can see the drivers are listed here in this slide. I have only few slides and I go fast. But the first one is climate change. Then we have globalization and trade. For example, during the COVID pandemic, we had countries that blocked their borders. They stopped exporting. Grain, wheat, and therefore globalization and trade is very important. Income growth and distribution, that is the consumer behaviors, urbanization, population growth, demographic, politics and leadership, socio-cultural context. But let's go into the climate change. Now, the sustainable food systems are defined, food systems, and I'm not talking only about agriculture, because somebody look at FIO only for the A of agriculture, but you have to look at the FIO for the F of food. And food is a bigger system. So sustainable food system is a food system that delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the economic, social, and environmental basis to generate food security and nutrition for future generations are not compromised. So we have to look at profitability, we have to look at benefits for the people, for the society, and a positive or at least a neutral impact on the natural environment. Now, let's see what is the importance of food systems in climate change and what is the importance of climate change in food systems. Food systems have a negative impact on climate change. Between 19 and 29% of the global human-generated emissions comes from the food systems, of which, of this 29%, 86% come from agriculture. So there is a big responsibility. A quarter of the responsibilities in green climate gas emissions comes from food systems. But climate change impacts negatively on food systems. So it's an impact that goes two ways. First of all, because climate change with droughts and floods increase food insecurity. Secondly, because we have seen a decline of between 10 and 25% in crop harvest. And we foresee that this will continue up to 2050. We see that the main fish catches is reduced by 40%, and the high carbon dioxide leads to reduced nutrient content in the food. And we have an increased food losses and waste due to extreme weather events. So you can see agriculture is part of the problem, and agriculture must be part of the solution, because without a sustainable food system, we have, and you can see, and I think the presentation can be distributed, how this is split in the different subcategories. Now, many of the world's current food systems are in need of transformation. So we need to make them sustainable. At the moment, they are not. We have still 820 million people undernourished, some of them in Bangladesh, certainly, dear ambassador. We know because Bangladesh was one of the main targets of the European Union development assistance when I was director of department in Brussels in charge of planet and prosperity. But we know also that there is 2 billion of adults which are overweight. And overweight is very, very pandemic, I would say, because generates a problem into the health systems, generates a very high cost into the health systems. This is well known to our Chinese friends and to our American friends, where the cost of health diseases related to food is enormous in the economy, in the budget for China. So we need to tackle now, but we have only 10 years left to deliver on the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. You see this diagram that comes from One Planet of the United Nations. We do have investment policies. We do have industrial policies. We do have a behavior by the private sector that must and can change. If we don't see this happening alone, the governments will not make. So governments alone, public forces cannot make this a possibility. We know, and I'm going to conclude, that the Food System Summit next year, for which I'm working in FIO, I'm responsible for the G20 and for the Food System Summit of next year in FIO. And we are building a platform for Mediterranean sustainable food system. And Turkey, like Italy, is part of this equation. In a way, in this ecosystem, which is the Mediterranean Sea, we have a much more, how can I say, harmonic relationship with nature. And so the food system are potentially more sustainable than others. Let me tell you what FAO can do on that. Well, FAO, is the custodian agency of indicators, of SDG, Sustainable Development Goals indicators. And you can see a number, a sample of our literary work where we produce guidelines, manuals, in order to help the industry, the agriculture, the governments into food system to become more sustainable. I want to, before closing, I wanted to tell you a story. The story is that, like for Bangladesh, we have to use the indigenous knowledge, the experience of the people that live and prosper in an ecosystem is so important for sustainability. Like in Bangladesh, people are used to centuries, a millennium, to have a relation with the sea and with the floods. And so they know how to cope. They know how to build resilience around that. Well, the same happens for Pacific Island countries, where you have a similar approach. Well, we learn to sail out of the stars from these people, and it's still unimaginable how could these people sail over the Pacific Ocean thousands and thousands of miles without having any knowledge of navigation instrument via astronomy. I'm talking of the ancestral knowledge, and the knowledge of the environment is so important because adaptation to climate change is the key for survival and for building resilience. I think I have taken my 10 minutes, but I will be open both questions on the political and policy aspects in small island countries, very susceptible to climate change, very fragile because they are small economies, heavily dependent on imports and on other countries. And on the other side, on the role of FIO in fighting climate change inside the food system. And I'm willing also to explore with you, if you wish, the perspective of the next year G20, which will be a lot about sustainability, circular economy, and the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ridolfi. Thank you. And I think the most important statement in your presentation was, we need to act collectively now. And I think that's the most vital thing. And I think, unfortunately, at the moment, this is also the biggest challenge. Given all this, great power competition and all the, protectionist tendencies in the world and so on, I think, well, that's crucial and that's also a bit difficult, but we need to work hard. Thank you very much. Now, our next speaker will be Mr. Fatih Özkadı. Fatih Özkadı is the Director of Quality, Sustainability and Corporate Affairs at Arçelik. And, well, he is our corporate representative in our lineup today. And throughout his career of almost 3 decades, he has always been, at the heart of energy and environment and sustainability related issues at the Koç Group. And he has also now, I mean, he doesn't limit his activities with his own company. He is also an active, champion of these issues in platforms like DEİK, TÜSİAD, and international platforms as well. So, Mr. Özkadı, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Atlı. I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so after your very kind introduction, I would like to add, I'm also the member of the DEİK. I'm the council business member of the Bangladesh and India. So regarding to my presentation, which is about the climate change in Asia-Pacific region, sectoral risks and the chains, you can see the slide, the map, between the 1998, 2017, the more than 500,000 people unfortunately died, and the roughly 3.5 trillion losses were incurred due to extreme weather events globally. In the table, you can see the global climate risk index shows the countries in the APAC region are seriously affected by the impact of the climate change. Most of the APAC is the most disaster-prone region due to low territories and high coastlines. I would like to give some examples. The 2011 flood in Thailand and 2011 earthquake and the tsunami in Japan. In this slide, I would like to talk about the climate change is the exponential warming degrees are not linear. It gets worse much quicker. The tremendous overlap in the style of the problem, climate crisis is a health crisis. I think also it affects the social life, definitely. The climate crisis is not just about the polar bears, the clean air, less respiratory problems, and also we have to think of the climate change like a fever for planet. The predicting for the pandemic and the climate change, it warned before it was very likely there would be a pandemic and also the climate crisis will the leaders begin listening now. We have to answer these the questions. And I want to talk about the sustainable business models in APAC. Although these risks were noticed before the COVID-19 crisis, the sustainable business models came to fore in the Asia-Pacific countries as well as the other, all over the world with the COVID-19 crisis. One of the issues that stand out in the sustainable business models in the continuity in the supply chain, which is very important. In this context, the Asia-Pacific should provide a transition from the traditional supply chain to the integrated supply chain model. According to the International Energy Agency data, as you can see at the graph, we can say that the CO2 emissions per GDP is in a decreasing trend in the Asia-Pacific region. This is a good news. The next slide, which shows about the total primary energy supply by source, the APAC region between the 1990 and 2017. When we examine the energy consumption by resource, it is seen that the use of the coal is still dominant, even though we see that the rate of the renewable energy has increased slightly. As you know, especially China has half of the world's coal demand, has increased this rate after the 2002 crisis by increasing the coal usage. The about of the CO2 emissions by the sector in APAC region. In this graph, you can see the sectoral development of the CO2 emissions in APAC region. We see that the highest rate of the increase is in the energy production and the transportation sector, according to the International Energy Agency data. As you can see, there has not been an increase in the industry sector recent years. I think that the most important development in the coming years will be in countries such as Pakistan and India, where the population coverage rate of the electricity is relatively low. With the infrastructure investment, the increased rate of the household consumption in recent years is remarkable. To prevent such an increase, I would like to emphasize the importance of the energy efficiency in white goods, which make up most of the household consumption in this region. As Arçelik company, we try to contribute to increasing the energy efficiency even in countries where there is no regulation. But I have to point out that setting the regulation, mainly the energy efficiency, is extremely important. In these countries, the promotion and the incentivizing the energy efficient products by the states in the coming period will also be very critical for the development of this area. So you can see the Arçelik's manufacturing facilities in all over the world, and we have a production facilities in Pakistan, India, Thailand, and Bangladesh that are the most likely be affected by the climate crisis. At Arçelik, our Risk and Sustainability Committee calculates the financial and the non-financial risks of possible typhoons, floods, tsunami, earthquakes, and determine our focus point to protect our employees against these risks, and while protecting our company with the global policies. In addition, in line with Arçelik sustainability strategy, we also set our targets such as energy efficiency, water efficiency, and the carbon emission reduction in production targets for our factories in this region, which we carry out globally. You can see our sustainability targets, the energy and the water efficiency targets compared to 2010 and 2012, the base years. We will achieve our energy and the water consumption per product targets at the end of this year. Our aim is to become carbon neutral in Turkey production firstly, the facilities at the end of the 2025. Then we will increase these targets to the APAC region production facilities. If I would like to talk about the energy efficiency in production, you can see the energy efficiency projects by the time. And as a result, in the last 10 years, we have realized nearly 2,000 energy efficiency projects in our global in production facilities. The amount of the saving that we achieved from these projects is equivalent to annual electricity usage of 115K households. And I think it's a good example on the closing the loop in our WEEE, waste of electrical equipment recycling plants. In Turkey, we have two recycling facility. One is Bolu, one is in Eskişehir. Taking the sustainability as a business model brings the innovative solutions in the fight against the climate crisis, and also the triggers awareness of the end users on this issue. You can see some examples such as the recycled PET tub washing machine and the washer dryer, fiber catcher, fiber bag for the tumble dryer, recycled fishing nets for cooking appliances, recycled fishing nets for the dishwasher, biofridge, autodose, and some packaging examples. We published our last sustainability reports by the 5th of June. You can see the details in our website, and we set the sustainability targets for the 2030. And lastly, I would like to point out some awards and achievements. Being the member of the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices, I think is very important. Arçelik recognized as industry leader the last year, the first and the only manufacturing company to join the Dow Jones Sustainability Emerging Markets Index from the Turkey, third times in a row. Thank you for your attention and for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Özkadı. Thank you for focusing on the business perspective. This is important because, well, at the end of the day, business are also, contributing to, carbon emissions and so on and so forth. And they have this also very important stake, business-wise and corporate responsibility-wise, to deal with sustainability issues. And also thank you for sharing your company's experience, because when we ask the question of what should the businesses do, so we need concrete examples. So I think Arçelik and Koç Group's example in this respect, with respect to sustainability, can be a very good benchmark, actually. So I will switch soon to our energy expert, Mrs. Bozok. But before that, let me, use my position as the moderator and, continue a little bit more with the business perspective as someone who is very much involved in the business between Turkey and Asia Pacific. Let me have a few words to the speakers who have already shared their comments. Then after that, we will be listening to our energy experts. Now, in Asia Pacific as a region as a whole, the impact on business is important because, we are talking here about a region which is producing more than half of the global emissions in the world. China alone is producing more than 1/4 of all the emissions at the global scale. And here we are talking about large and fast-growing economies. Now, China, India, they are not only big, they are also growing fast. And well, I lived in China, and so that's a country, a huge machinery, a huge economic machinery, which is, for example, still, working on coal, and hence the air pollution. Many examples like this, but I think we need the impact on the businesses and how the businesses respond is very important, as we have seen in the Arçelik example. Well, in general terms, for the Asia Pacific, extreme climate conditions, extreme weather issues can cause major disruptions, and we have been seeing them. And we have seen in the last presentation that they can be very costly as well, because they are affecting both the demand and supply side, just like the COVID pandemic. Climate change is affecting both the demand and supply side. Well, extreme weather issues causing flooding, causing storms, causing natural disasters. If you go to the extremes, they are also affecting the logistics. They are affecting the infrastructure and so on. And this is why actually whole business sectors and related to them whole communities can be simply wiped out by climate change. We have listened to the experience of the Pacific Islands by someone who has actually lived there, Dr. Ridolfi. So for them, it's an existential threat, and so is it for some business sectors. Think about, for example, the agricultural producers or the winemakers, or I don't know, the dairy producers in Australia, or the winter tourism in Japan and China, or the fishing communities in Southeast Asia. For them, it's a live or die issue. And think about, Pacific Islands, the Maldives, who depend on tourism for their well-being, for their existence. I mean, if you're living on Fiji, for example, well, climate change is a terrible thing. It's not a theoretical abstraction for you. It's right there. It's an existential threat for you. If you're in Fiji, well, you depend either on tourism or on fisheries. Both are affected. The warming of the seas are affecting fisheries, and the global warming and the increase in the coastal, the rise of the coastal level of sea is, affecting tourism badly. Agriculture, not only tourism and so on, but agriculture, a lot of things, but there are also indirect effects on businesses. For example, when these threats increase, well, so do the insurance premiums. You need to pay more for insurance. But if you're doing business in Fiji, well, probably you will be facing more and more higher insurance premiums. Property valuations. If you own property as a company, somewhere, facilities, buildings, production facilities, property valuations are going down. So, okay, these are not maybe the most vital things, but these are very important for the businesses. And in the COVID-19 experience has shown how costly the lockdowns can be for the businesses. And lockdowns will be coming soon if the climate change continues at its current pace. So today we are told that there's virus and we shouldn't leave, which is, the right thing to do, of course. And we to tell our businesses to shut down so that we can deal with the virus. But tomorrow the virus will be gone and we will have other things. Like, for example, they will tell us, our government will tell us that, there will be acid rains and we shouldn't leave the house for 2 months. So what will happen to the businesses? So what we are experiencing with COVID is, not one single case. There will be similar cases and they will be related to climate change. And also, there are talks about opportunities because of the climate change for businesses. Well, I see an opportunity in, establishing sustainable business models. This is not only good for the environment, this is good for your business as well. But other than that, for example, when you think about the debates going around the climate change in the Arctic Circle, and the ice is melting, and therefore oil and gas will be more accessible, and there will be new transportation routes. I'm not so sure about this. So yes, from a business perspective, shorter routes means less costs, fine. The sea, oil and gas resource without the ice on top of them, lower drilling costs, lower production costs, yes. But we are not talking about the short run here. In the long run, everybody will lose because of these things. And finally, policy responses in Asia Pacific, some of them have been discussed. Like certainly there's a shift to sustainable business models in Asia. Certainly there's a shift to pricing carbon, like through carbon trading or carbon taxes, especially in China, Japan, and Korea. It is important because we need investment. We need to invest in business models, sustainable models, and so there need to be incentives for this. And well, this region certainly needs also, new business models in the form of sustainable farming, sustainable fishing methods, ecotourism, promoting ecotourism, reef conservation projects. I studied in Australia, and I have, gone to the reef, the Great Barrier Reef, and it's so heartbreaking to see pictures that are coming now with all the bleaching and so on. And climate proofing, vital infrastructure, all these things will be the part of the portfolio in the coming years, hopefully. And also regional cooperation is very important. This is again another area where we need progress, especially these days. Okay, I'm not going to, so this was kind of a wrap up together with my own ideas, but now I want to leave the floor to Mrs. Sıla Bozok, who is a member of Future Energy Leaders, FEL, Future Energy Leaders, which is a program of the World Energy Council. So this program is actually a network, a global and diverse network of young energy professionals designed to help shape and inspire, grow the energy decision makers of tomorrow, producing, training leaders capable of solving the world's most pressing challenges related to energy and sustainability. Well, I look at Mrs. Bozok's work, and I wouldn't really call her a future energy leader, because I also think that she is doing quite some work at the present. So she is at the present and also in the future. So the floor is yours, Mrs. Bozok.
Thank you, Mr. Atlı, for the kind words, and thank you to everyone who dialed in to today's call. Yeah, I'm speaking here as a member of the Future Energy Leaders. As Mr. Atlı mentioned, it is an organization of around 100 people from all around the world who are under the age of 35. We aim to come up with creative, innovative ideas to drive the energy transition around the world. It can be in public sector or private sector or in academia. Our purpose is to draw more attention to the climate change and energy transition. And for this matter, actually, I find this picture here very meaningful, because I took this picture when I was in 2018, when I was in the Arctic, supporting a climate change project there. And this was a picture we took with our friends in the Hudson Bay. And it was an eye-opener for me, and we covered pretty much all the scientific background of the topics we discussed here today. For those who don't believe that, this picture belongs to the Arctic, and here's a polar bear on the right bottom side of this presentation. So I don't take much of your time. I will just give a very brief introduction. I hope we can just deep dive with the Q&As. So first of all, what does the energy have to do with climate change? Well, it has a lot. If you go and see the slide from the World Resources Institute, you see the majority of the emissions are coming from the energy sectors. Now, if you want to know, if you want to tackle the climate change, we first need to know the causes of this climate change, and we need to understand the sectoral problems in energy and the causes of these emissions. Then we can give a better answer against the climate change. We keep talking about the energy transition and how this has become a buzzword for the last 2 decades. Basically, it sums up all the around the world when tackling the climate change. You can consider this concept composed of 3 pillars. This is decentralization and digitalization. Well, because now we are living in a world where the actors both on the supply side and on the demand side of the energy sector have multiplied. So we see the actors on the both sides from time to time. And when it comes to decarbonization, we also spot there is a high demand in low carbon technologies and low carbon energy supply around the world. And as for the digitalization, well, the current coronavirus situation has also prompted that, but now there is a high demand for mobility and electrification around the world. All these are problems. All these are making this climate change a harder issue to attack. Now I'm gonna show you some data of the World Energy Issues Monitor. This is a this is a survey published by the World Energy Council. You can see the respondents from the Asia-Pacific region here, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. They are asked about the topics that need for action and the topics that are critically uncertain. And when it comes to the respondents in the APEC region, they see the economic growth as the topic, the most crucial topic, whereas the US policy is the most critically uncertain topic in the region. You see all those diverse topics are shifting towards the extreme end of the graph, and they are highlighting economic growth as an even bigger problem that needs for an action. And very linked to that, the uncertainty here is the commodity prices. And until that, so far, we don't see anything about climate change in their responses. Only when you look at to the wider Asia, you start to see the renewable energies as a topic that needs for action, which is very meaningful because to put it in contrast with the OPEC, with the OECD countries, you see that OECD countries doesn't differentiate that much between the climate framework and renewable energies. Now, this kind of demonstrates the prioritization in the Asia-Pacific region. This is not to say that, oh, they don't care that much about the climate change, no. But a man first gotta eat and gotta have access to secure energy resources. That's the priority here. They see a high correlation between energy and economy, which is very meaningful. And also another takeaway you can get from all these responses is that probably the energy transition in Asia will not be similar to the one in OECD countries because of all these responses about blockchain, data, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things here in the slide. These are the uncertainties that were not present 2 decades ago when the OECD countries were having their emergence. So there is not a path dependency here. These Asian countries and emerging markets can achieve their own energy transition with an unprecedented way, which is something very hopeful for tackling the climate change as well. This is a slide Fatih has also shown, but here I'd also like to draw attention to the growing share of coal in the primary energy supply, because in the last decade it has replaced biofuels and waste, whereas the oil is more or less stable and there is stable, if not growing. Now, this is also very important because this is a primal cause of the climate change related issues in this region. And this is not a very easy story in this region either, because many of these countries are having energy poverty. And if you look into Australia or Indonesia, these are like big coal suppliers in the world. And Australia has just repealed its carbon tax just a couple of years ago, well, more than 5 years ago, because they wanted to actually keep going on with the coal sector. And yes, they are aware of that it has a very, it has the major impact in the climate change, but it's abundant, it's cheap, and it's sustainable. Now, you gotta find a way to replace these features with a new emerging technology, and the answer is not always renewables. You cannot be very discriminatory when you look into your energy mix. You gotta also assess nuclear power, you gotta assess hydrogen if you wanna be very future-proof, or you can go for more transfer fuels like natural gas. And it doesn't show that in the region there is not a development for the renewable energies. There are massively big M&As going on in the region, in Indonesia and in New Zealand and in Australia. There are a lot of good policies put in place, but still, if you want to move forward with them and be very fierce, probably the public opinion will not be happy about the rising cost of the electricity when it comes to that. Their primary concern is the power outages. Yeah, and also this graph shows that the majority of the emissions are coming from the coal burned in this region. Thus to another concept of law coined by the World Energy Council, and this is the energy trilemma. Energy trilemma basically describes the difficulty of balancing three components of an energy system. This is the energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability. These are very difficult to balance when you try to have an energy transition, especially in the region. There is a growth for electricity generation, natural east. So in order to meet the demand, these countries need to have generation and transmission investment. And also, some countries have different pace of growing demand compared to the others, like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos have a big pace of demand, and Vietnam are somewhat slow in their rise in demand, but there is an overall demand in the region. This is to say that there is still a lot of people without electricity and access to supply in this geography. Still, 250 million people rely on solid biomass as a cooking fuel, and there's not still going to be an universal access to energy before 2030. In this situation, it would be unfair to expect them to just prioritize lowering their carbon footprint no matter what and shut down all their coal production. You need to come up with more market-based mechanisms to replace that over years, because energy transition is a combination of big breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs, and also a very slow evolution. This is why some of the initiatives taken in the past were not that successful. Yes, in Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia, they had introduced feed-in tariffs for renewables, but the investment response was somewhat mixed. So this is just to wrap up. I can say that for this region, there is no silver bullet for an energy transition. First of all, in Asia Pacific, we cannot be discriminatory when it comes to the supply mix. We need all the bullets in our gun for tackling this climate change issue. We need to find alternatives to replace the coal usage in power generation. This can be natural gas, or this can be renewables, but renewables are not the same with coal, because renewables are intermittent energy supply. So when there is no sun and when there is no wind, you will still want to use your phone and your computer. So you need probably more stable base load in your economy, which is natural gas or nuclear right now. Also, there is growing demand for liquefied natural gas in the region. Like in the countries like the Indonesia, Thailand, they are still building new LNG import terminals, which is a positive thing for the energy transition. Second thing is that there are very good business cases of distributed energy systems in this region, in Australia and New Zealand, and even in Thailand. This is what we call the democratization of the energy system, because you can produce and consume the electricity on the same location, which is very useful for very population-wise dense areas. And I believe that digitalization and mobility will solve many of the energy access problems in this region. And then comes the more difficult things to do. electrification and alternative fuels like hydrogen are still needs time to develop and bring online. And then carbon pricing is definitely needed to take the coal out of the supply mix and replace it with natural gas. It can be also a carbon tax or any other indirect taxations. You can put a levy on the car fuels, etc. Then there must be some initiative to take back the emissions already emitted into the atmosphere, because being net zero is not enough. You need to be negative and create natural or unnatural carbon sinks in the world. You can use carbon capturing, storage and sequestration technologies, or you can just basically build forests, but you need forests as the size of Brazil to be net zero with the emissions path we see right now. So this is still not easy to convince people to convert their lands from farming to forests, and it will still take time for them to get the emission out from the atmosphere. I just like to set up and summarize with this drawing here. Yes, like we mentioned that there are still some climate skeptics in the world, and we still want to make our energy transition, sustain our energy transition, be energy independent, preserve rainforests, create livable cities and jobs, and leave a better future for our kids. But what if all this climate change is, as the skeptics say, is a big hoax, and it's not like we are creating a better world for just nothing, right? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bozorg. Thank you very much for all these valuable insights, and also thank you for concluding with the skeptics. I mean, they are a part of the picture, they are part of the whole process, and well, a very important part actually, given
Yes.
their scale, and given the positions some of them are holding in high offices. Well, I'm not talking about a particular country. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, all our speakers. And now we still have some time for questions. Actually, I have received through different channels one question for everybody, and without losing time, I want to ask my question to Mr. Fatih Özkadı, because I know he has a meeting coming up after this. Mr. Özkadı, your question is, well, I'm summarizing it. Arçelik is a good example, obviously, in terms of building sustainable business models, building, dealing with climate change and doing, its part for dealing climate change. But, all these things require resources, and Arçelik, big company, big holding group, and so on. So what is the role here for smaller, less resourceful companies like SMEs? So what can they do, or what should they do in terms of dealing with climate change?
Thank you. This is a very good question. I think my main role is to extend and to share the existing know-how on energy efficiency studies and the sustainability project outputs in the manner of the environment based the projects. For example, during the last 5 years, we have been sharing our knowledge to our suppliers to get their energy efficiency studies, which will be very effective by the time. We know that our some suppliers has good enough the resources to study on it, but unfortunately some suppliers cannot have such a resources, as you said, and we have to share our experience and the project outputs through our ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Özkadı. Thank you. Well, given a whole large portion of the economy, Turkish economy and elsewhere is made of SMEs, I think that's what matters most. And I think there's a big role for the larger companies with the leading companies here as well. And my next question will be for Ambassador Turan. You talk about, Bangladesh, the climate change being a part of daily life, part of the physical reality in Bangladesh. Now, the question that I received is about another reality of Bangladesh, which is refugees. So refugees from the Arakan region and so on. So a whole exodus of people and so on, inflow of people and so on. So do you have an observation about this, how this climate change, how the conditions related to the changing climate is affecting the refugee issue in Bangladesh?
Thank you for this question, which is extremely important. Actually, the concept of climate refugees is high on the agenda of the United Nations, especially UNHCR. We all know that there are some really gloomy, estimates about the number of people who will be displaced because of the effects of climate change in the years to come. According to optimistic estimates, the numbers of displaced people, which is around 70 million today, will rise up to 200 million in the next, decade or so. And according to pessimistic estimates, it will go up to 500 million. So if we consider this as something that is on top of what we have, like the numbers will increase on top of the numbers of displaced people that exist already today, this is going to be, and the fact that the international system and national systems, including in Bangladesh, are not able to cope with the existing numbers. I mean, Turkey is a good example in sort of somehow, hosting the largest number of refugees in its own territory without much, international sort of assistance. Which was promised but not delivered to the extent that was promised. So the countries like Bangladesh, or countries in Africa, when they face with large influx of people due to climate change, and that these people will have nowhere else to go or go back to their own countries, this will be a huge burden. And also we should consider about internal displacement, not just people coming from other countries. Like there is 1 million Rohingya refugees who left Myanmar because of a conflict there, the persecution there. But when there is climate change, people lose their homes. They have nowhere to go back to. So it's going to be a huge challenge in the years to come. And I think one of the most devastating consequences of climate change for human civilization.
Thank you very much. And this also shows us how these big major problems that we are facing at the global level are actually so much intertwined with each other. Now, climate change and the refugee issue and you name it, economic crisis and so on. So really, I mean, these require comprehensive solutions. These are global problems, and there's no country in the world that can solve these problems on themselves. This is why we need, as was mentioned in the presentation by Dr. Ridolfi, we need to act collectively. We need to cooperate now, because that's the only way. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And by the way, also I have received a question through the question function of our software by Mr. Ercüment Polat, and Dr. Roberto Ridolfi it was a very good question, and there's a very good answer by Dr. Ridolfi. So to save time, I encourage all the audience to read the question and Dr. Ridolfi's answer to it. In the meantime, I received another question for Dr. Ridolfi, which is related to the work of FAO, actually. Now, it's about, well, it goes like this. The whole multilateral system, the global governance system, the UN system, you name it, the entire system is going actually through a difficult time, through a time which is, basically very much undermined by, global competition, especially between big powers. Now, trade wars, and then we see everybody's questioning the existence of WTO. What is it good for? So I'm saying unfortunately, because as you said, we need cooperation. But what we see is actually, the opposite at the multilateral global governance level. So all these things, the question is, this great power competition, or all these political issues between the leading countries and so on, do they affect your work? Do they affect the work of FAO? Do these even affect the work of an institution which aims to provide, food for the hungry people in the world?
Thank you, Dr. Attlee. Well, obviously, all the geopolitics affect the behavior of a UN agency. You must also appreciate that FAO is not the bureaucracy of the FAO. FAO is the 192 member states that compose it, which they have a secretariat, which is the bureaucracy of FAO, of which I'm part. So the very essence of this agency is the member states, is a pure intergovernmental machine. The Director General of FAO, for example, is elected by a vote every 4 years of the 192. And of course, Dr. Chu from China was elected last year and now is starting a process of reforms, important. Coming to your question, and we are a technical agency. Technical agencies, so we are a little bit insulated from the big politics, but not so much, not so much. Your question should go more to the Secretariat of the Secretary General in New York, where they have the sort of the head of the UN system. But truly, and it's not a mystery, the UN system is stopped at Yalta. It's a child of Yalta agreement after the Second World War, and the world has changed very much, radically, I would say. And I think this struggle among powers, sometimes neglecting the importance of multilateralism, is quite annoying, because we know that a number of questions, starting from climate change, honestly, will not be addressed if not the community of nations will have a standing point position. There is another aspect as well, which is the fact that the UN system is perceived far from the real people. I'm not talking of agencies like UNCHR, which is the Human Rights Refugee Council and Commissioner. I'm not talking about WFP and FIO. We are saving lives in emergency. This is very close and very important to the people. But some others, with their technical work, sometimes are perceived a little bit distant. WTO, the Uruguay round has never ended. The Doha round has never ended. So there is a progress, and globalization is under question now after the pandemic of COVID-19. We have a questioning about long supply chains. I use this as a paradigm in my answer. Long supply chains is not that I'm looking at nationalism. We have to have open borders, but we have to be ready to work with the community of our neighbors. This is very important, because in that way, I think the community will extend, and by extension, the communities will touch each other. Of course, I've been 25 years with the European Union, so the example that I have in my mind is that kind of community. But in spite of all odds, I think the experience of the European Union is still an example in the world of how economic, political integration of countries can lead to prosperity and happiness. But somebody will disagree even to this sentence. So we have a very, very high risky zone of discussion. Certainly multilateralism is indispensable, and we have to defend it. We have to push for multilateral. There are questions that cannot be resolved by the egoism or by the self-interest of the countries. There must be a kind of willingness by countries to put their interest on the table, but open and ready to negotiate them. And this is the essence of multilateralism, which is driven, like the climate change will demonstrate. I remember COP21. I was there in Paris. I remember that until the last hour, the agreement was not there. In 2015, that agreement was really reached in the last night, in the last hour, by very skillful diplomats, that, all the technical question aside, have brought the political importance of reaching agreement. And that is, I think, the essence of multilateralism, bringing the political importance of agreeing in spite of all odds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ridolfi. I certainly agree with you. We need not less but more multilateralism, more globalization, and maybe it's time to deal with the fix the shortcomings of the multilateralism and build on the strong sides of it, instead of trying to write a total new story. And I think that's the way to go forward. Thank you very much. And please also look at this. To a previous question, there's an answer by the ambassador. And well, he's right. So we are entering a new normal and working from everywhere. Well, I certainly hope that the Zoom thing won't be 24 hours a day. I'm really tired of webinars, teaching, meetings, and so on. But certain things will stay, and definitely these things will help to reduce carbon emissions, less travel. I'm very happy, to stay here and do this, but I also need some human interaction maybe. But I'm sure that in the new normal, we can find a better and more environment-friendly, combination for our work habits. And finally, there's also a question, a short but meaningful question to Mrs. Slabozok, and this is, well, it goes like this. Throughout this coronavirus period, we have seen oil prices going down to negative levels. So are we entering a period of cheap oil, and what does that mean for climate change?
Yeah, so they are talking about the US future contract that was a couple of months ago. And it was just for 1 day, but it was not on the Brent price. However, yes, the global demand was reduced because the oil prices are composed of boom and bust cycles. This is a cyclical price feature we see here, and it's not like this is going to change, even though we don't have OPEC-like cartel in the future, because they are trying to counterbalance it with another formed cartel of alternative suppliers. Or what you can do is to empower also the demand side. This is what I keep supporting in in all of my speeches and in every paper I write. The awareness of the demand side is very crucial here to shift the demand to elsewhere from oil. And yes, we always consider ourselves as the individuals and don't think we have any any significant impact vis-a-vis the corporations, but actually this coronavirus thing has shown that even single person's behaviors and responsibility changes a lot of things. So we got to be mindful of that. And a couple of years ago, like in 2015, also the prices were as low as $25. Now this has went even below that, but we don't see a significant change in the demand. As long as we don't change that, the prices will bounce back. Okay, probably it will not bounce back to $120, but it will balance itself around $60, which is enough for many of the oil producers like Saudi Arabia to continue pumping, because their costs are as low as $2 per barrel. In order to beat that, one cannot lower the oil prices, but you gotta erase the demand out from the market for that. You gotta demand, as the consumer, you gotta demand using more public transportation, electric vehicle, LNG-fired trucks for transportation, LNG-fired ships, because many of the emissions are coming from the trade, but not from the passenger cars. So heavy duty cars, these are the main thing, and this is also our responsibility. I also find this very irresponsible to just put all the blame on the supply side. I have been trying to change my personal behaviors and the behaviors of the people around me for a long time. And this is how we can change this boom and bust cycle and really make it lower forever, because all the supply of oil will not end because we will exhaust all the oil reserves, but it will reach a peak because we will give up on using oil. We will switch to electric cars, we will switch to even bikes or more livable cities. And this is the answer to this question, I think.
It is indeed. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bozok. And before I conclude, because we have really run out of time, but there is one more question, which is in fact answered by Dr. Ridolfi. The question is about the role that the companies can play in climate change adaptation and development efforts in post-conflict contexts like Syria and Sudan. And Dr. Ridolfi has answered this. He said, creating, protecting, promoting, inventing decent and sustainable jobs into a sustainable economy after crisis. Well, let me share my opinion with this as a conclusion. I definitely agree with Mr. Ridolfi. This is, so we need to really think about this reconstruction processes in the post-conflict areas. It's not only about construction business. I mean, the buildings have gone down, let's build new ones. It's not just that. It's about giving these people their lives back. So therefore, jobs are more important perhaps than buildings. You know, climate change related sustainability is more important. Health services is more important. And here, not companies on their own, but companies in cooperation with governments and also with the multilateral government institutions. I think in this way we can create the best results because, well, if you don't want the conflict to happen again, you need to have a real good post-conflict reconstruction process. I mean, that's as simple as this, I think. So thank you very much. I need to close here now. I thank all the participants for their, very insightful views on this very important issue. I'm sure, and well, I hope, and I'm actually sure that we will discuss this issue more often. And I also thank DEİK headquarters, Temmuz Bey, Volkan Bey, for their efforts put in this. And I expect them also to come up with more ideas for webinars related to Asia Pacific region. And also a big thank you for the audience and for their very important questions. Well, for me, it was a very good experience. I learned a lot. So until we see each other again in a forthcoming DEİK event, goodbye and take care, and please stay safe. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.